Right. And Ms. Clerk.
Item 13, Stage 3 Drought Update.
Okay. Mr. Hagmark, whenever you're ready.
Madam Mayor, council members, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, and here to provide another drought update. I'm going to dive right in. A drought status. Well, obviously, we haven't seen any reprieve this summer, so we remain at a severe drought condition based on the U.S. Drought Monitor that's provided on a monthly basis and updated. And we have, as of the end of September, wrapped up the 7 driest consecutive years on record. So we are now in year 8. As you may recall, when we started this, we had, in 2011, adopted a 6-year plan to deal with dry conditions. So we have certainly surpassed that 6-year planning horizon and continue now to plan out for the next 3 years. So needless to say, the city remains in a drought emergency. Continues to be a highlight of the community's performance on conservation, which is really remarkable. A lot of communities have seen conservation drop off, and we've seen it stay consistent, which is really impressive. We had 29% conservation for August, which is really difficult when it's warm, and our 12-month running average sits at 31%. As we probably heard before, the water usage of this community right now is on par with what the community was using in the 1950s. Just really, just really remarkable, figuring we have twice as many people living in Santa Barbara as we did in the 1950s. Water sales, just keeping an eye on it. Again, this is an unaudited revenue tracking, but we're just keeping an eye on it. And our revenue has been tracking consistent with what we were projecting, so we're feeling really good about where we are with our rates. Basically, we're feeling we've hit a stable position. Our water supplies, a few things to update on that. So Gibraltar sits there with 3,600 acre feet of water in it right now. Really got some disappointing news back. We've been doing bathymetric surveys, so this tells us the volume of the reservoir, and we've been now kind of in this groove of doing them on a yearly basis because of the fires and damage that we've seen from those. And we've just got back information showing that we lost 654 acre feet of capacity as a result of the Thomas Fire in the first year alone. I expect if we do see some rainfall this winter, we will lose additional capacity. We are working with FEMA since it was declared a disaster, particularly the January 9th storm. And we're working with them to try and see if we can't recoup some costs for the damages as a result. We got a great letter of support from Cal OES, and we are working with Congressman Carbajal and Senator Feinstein's office to see if they'll also send a letter of support, seeing if we can't get FEMA to step up to the plate on this. Water quality remains challenging at Gibraltar. We're able to bring down a small amount of water, really blending it down in order to meet our water quality standards, but really the water's starting to degrade pretty quickly because of the temperature, and so we're hopeful we get some decent rainfall this winter to kind of flush some of that stuff out of the reservoir. I'll talk a little bit later how this impacts our supply strategy. Cachuma has 61,000 acre feet of water at 32% of capacity. The city has actually a pretty sizable chunk of water in there right now. It's sitting in about 8,600 acre feet of that. The downstream water rights release wrapped up, and just want to put another plug in for the cooperation this time around. We reached out to them early on, and they gave us a guarantee that they would not release over 10,000 acre feet, and they actually came in at 8. It was really helpful in helping us to plan. Without knowing, we would have had to run ahead and put the barge in, the emergency pumping barge, and because of their commitment, we were able to defer that till next spring, and actually because of their release, hopefully we've been able to defer that until late summer. And if we get some rainfall this winter, it may be able to push it out a whole nother year, which would be really huge for us. We did, unfortunately, get a late hit from reclamation. This is a big frustration for costs that were incurred by the Bureau going back to 2015. These were costs related to the emergency pumping system for the fish. And if you may remember, the valves on the dam broke and they had to replace those too. And they're finally catching up with those costs. Those costs ended up being around $1 million. And of those costs, about $550,000 were attributable to the city. And right now where we stand is we have budgeted money for the pumping barge. And we're in a position right now where we could take that money and go ahead and pay this deficit and avoid approximately $12,000 in interest. Or we could wait until the spring when we know whether or not we're going to do the barge. Where I'm pushing forward, unless the council has any issues, I'm going to go ahead and make that payment, pay off the deficit that is owed, clear that off the books, and then if we need that pumping barge, I would return to the council for appropriation of money from reserves to fund that, unless there's any issues with that. That's what I'd like to do. I want to bring something to your attention, and we do have an item scheduled for City Council on October 23rd, but this is just a preview of that. So we have been working with the county on a allocation for this year. The member units, consisting of Carpinteria, Goleta, Montecito, and ID1, had been doing a lot of modeling of the reservoir to see what water was actually available for allocation. And we had arrived at 40%. And we had given that to the county and said, we believe there's plenty of water in that reservoir to do a 40% allocation. The county requested an extension from the Bureau because they didn't like what we were requesting, and subsequently submitted with our request an alternative request, which was not consistent with our contract. Our contract with them says they are to act on behalf of the member units, and we were acting jointly, and they chose to throw their weight into the hat saying we don't agree with the member units 40%. They did not provide additional data. They just said that they didn't agree with our calculations. And Reclamation took this information and sided with the county and ultimately ended up with a 20% allocation. We're really frustrated with this and believe the county is in breach of our contract with them. And so we'll be back on October 23rd to speak more with the City Council on this and how we would like to respond. As far as imported water, there hasn't been much of a change. We've actually been using a lot of imported water in the reservoir. We'd actually been building it up going into the summer, and we've drawn it down extensively. You can see there we only have 45 acre-feet of state water remaining in there, and that's why we have 8,600 acre-feet of Kachuma supply in there. So it's just juggling our different supplies. It all passes through Kachuma, but we will, once again, this year be looking for, this coming year, if we don't get adequate rainfall, we'll be looking to purchase additional water, and we do have money set aside for that. Our current water debt is 3,700 acre-feet of water that we have to pay back. Groundwater, we did operate our wells this year from May through September, and that was partially because we were unable to really get water out of Gibraltar. We kind of supplemented it with groundwater, particularly from this lower storage unit basin. We kept an eye, and we did not see a significant change in the seawater intrusion that we were monitoring. We also got the final USGS Sustainable Yield Model Study back, and it's a rather thick document. Ms. Dyer, our water supply manager, is finishing up her review, and as part of the November update, she's going to provide how that may change our use of the groundwater basin going forward. As far as desal, the plant continues to operate, and we continue to work on wrapping up the elements of construction. There's just outstanding deliverables that they have, but overall, it's huge success to have that. We had a great open house. We were able to provide tours to over 200 residents. And really just, it was great to have the positive support out there. Senator Jackson showed up on Saturday as well. She wasn't able to join the Wednesday public meeting or the media meeting, but really, really overwhelming response, positive response. Really appreciate that. As far as recycled water, we continue to be in this position of limbo. A facility is unable to meet its design capacity. There is an item, I think, next week on the agenda to talk some more about this. The secondary aeration project is wrapping up construction. We expect that to be done in early 2019. And we believe that is one of the key components that should allow us to reach the full capacity of that facility. I think I advised last time we were here that we were having issues with operating the facility. We had some of the piping you can see in the picture there break. Again, we suspect it's a design issue, but we had that pipe break. We had it break twice. And when it did, pieces of pipe went flying, and we're fortunate that we didn't have staff working around there. So we took the time to actually secure the situation so that if it broke again, at least staff wasn't at risk, and it did take some more time to get the facility back up and operating. So it was offline for almost 2 months there. Anyway, the plant is currently online and operating, and we hope it will continue to do so. As far as water supply strategies, I'm going to show you 2 graphics here, and I just want to talk about the 2 different scenarios. So one was, and this was in May, we had provided these to council. One was, this was the scenario if we had Gibraltar, we're able to utilize water from Gibraltar, and then the second one is without. In this scenario, we were recognizing that in 2021, a potential shortfall of about 800 acre feet. Again, pretty small if we get some decent rainfall to fill that gap, but that's what we're going to be taking a look at, and we're planning to update this for November to reflect a combination of what's basically, this is the second graphic. This was the graphic we looked at with no Gibraltar, and in that case, it had about a 1,300 acre foot deficit in 2021. We're going to bring back a revised one, but basically we were able to operate the wells this summer, so that kind of minimized some of the impacts. So we're going to end up somewhere in between these. I suspect somewhere around 1,000 acre foot deficit out in 2021. Again, something that is manageable to tackle if we get some reasonable rainfall. And if not, we will also be preparing for a discussion about what the next increment of desal expansion looks like. So at this point, if there's no questions, I'm going to turn it over to Madeline Ward, who's going to walk you through some of the outreach.
Ms. Ward.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Madeline Wood, and I'm the Water Conservation Supervisor. And I'm here to share our latest episode of our Garden Wise TV show. This is our long-running garden show that's about 30 minutes each episode. It began in 2006, and to date we have 34 episodes that have been created. It's produced by City TV, along with the City Water Resources Division, the County Water Agency, and Goleta Water District. And the episodes can be viewed on YouTube, Cox Channel 18, Cox Channel 20, or Comcast Channel 23. Our newest episode is titled, I'll Take Plants for 400, Alex, and it highlights a Waterwise Jeopardy game, as you can see here, where contestants are in a thrilling game on competing with their irrigation and landscaping knowledge with our host named Alex Trebeck. We had to do it. Also, we have a great segment on learning how to design and maintain a fire-wise garden that both saves water and helps protect your home from wildfire. And that is with our wildland specialist, Ann Marks, and a local garden designer, Ariana Jansma. And then we also have a design segment with local landscape architect and author Billy Goodnick, and he teaches us how to pick out plants at a nursery, and that is at Seaside Gardens right there. And lastly, we have a segment on attracting beneficial insects to your garden with Corey Wells of Lotus Land, who takes us through the insectary garden at Lotus Land that has a lot of native plants to attract beneficial insects. And we're here for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Mr. Hart, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a kind of a comment and a question too. We have been not watering De La Guerra Plaza since the council made a decision about conserving water strategically through the park system. And, you know, obviously I understand we are still in a very severe drought and we're asking folks to conserve water, but we're asking folks to be smart about how they use water and to be selective and strategic, and the public is performing incredibly doing that. And I think it's time that we think about De La Guerra Plaza strategically and reconsider the decision to not water that park. It is the front yard of Santa Barbara. We have a lot of community events there. This year in particular, there's been a lot of community events, and the amount of water that we're talking about is symbolic water. It's not real water in the context of the city's drought situation. And short of re-landscaping the entire plaza, with a large capital project that would put drought-tolerant plant out there, I can't see us, solving that problem and returning that to some semblance of, presentability without just watering the lawn. And I'd just like to know what staff thinks about that. There are other parks that are being watered. I know the Parks Department had a very specific, well-thought-out plan as to which lawns and turf areas in the city parks to let go in response to the drought and which ones not to. And this was, I think, included as a let go because of the as a symbolic gesture to the community. And I think, we don't need symbolism anymore. We need to actually save water where it matters in a smart way, not a symbolic way anymore. And I think De La Guerra Plaza is the lead example of that, where we ought to change course. So there's a question embedded in there somewhere about what would be, let's see.
Ms. Bjork, what are your thoughts on De La Guerra Plaza grass?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director. I certainly, one of the factors about which lawns to keep alive and which to allow to go golden had to do with how much community use, whether they were an active recreation space. I certainly think that De La Guerra Plaza qualifies as an active recreation space. There's a lot of community activity happening there. Reestablishing the lawn would take more than just watering it, but we will talk to Parks and Recreation about that. I certainly know that the administrator has been interested in that, so we can pursue that and take a look at it and see what it will take to reestablish something more than what's there right now, because I agree it's gone beyond golden.
Mr. Walker had filled out a speaker slip, but he's gone. So you can ask questions or make deliberative comments. Did you have anything else to say, Mr. Hart? Okay, then Ms. Snedden, you're next.
Thank you. Just I hadn't planned on commenting on that, but it does tie into we are in unprecedented situation starting year 8, and I think when we look at we've talked about this at Water Commission also, but not just status quo of maintaining, but what it would take to actually rebound. This is me speaking, not Water Commission speaking, what it would take to rebound some of our resources. And so when we talk about symbolic gestures or things like lawn, from my perspective, lawn is dead, and we're not coming back from that. And a symbolic gesture and a real gesture might be planting something drought tolerant, planting a new type of example of what it is that we would hope the rest of our community would do. It's not enough, in my view now, to just conserve even to 1950s levels if our lake is still at 30% or lower. That's me speaking. In response to the presentation, I just really appreciate all of the work that the Water Department does in managing this very diversified water portfolio. And if we could just go back to that last slide about the water supply strategy. And just maybe we could highlight some of the individual brackets in here. So this is assuming no Gibraltar, that it's no longer useful or that it have to be blended to the point. And what are some of the other areas? We have the water purchases. They're larger now, but expected to decrease. Could you just maybe go through these each individually?
Right, so this was based on the water we had purchased already, and we're planning to deliver over this time period here. So this is the water that we had on hand. And again, this next winter we'll look at, but this also recognizes limitations on our delivery system. So it's really a combination of state water and water purchases. This right here kind of fills our capacity in the state water pipeline so that we're always maximizing that. So that could change if we get a larger state water allocation. Then we need to purchase less because the pipeline will be in essence full, and we get about 30% of our water supply through that. I do want to point out this, and again, this was put together really in May. We try to do updates to our strategy in November and May, kind of to reflect how the summer went and then again how the winter went. It's usually our pattern that we're getting into here. But this looks like we used a lot of Gibraltar water. This was water used early on in 2018 water year. So remember last year we had a pretty good supply of water in Gibraltar, and so that reflected a lot that was imported prior to January 9th when we got all the mud and debris flows that came into Gibraltar and basically ruined what was in there. So that reflected a large portion of that. Realistically, we're looking at just basically Mission tunnel flows going forward. So that's what this particular scenario looks like here. We do have some Cachuma. Next year, we're planning to actually use quite a bit of the water that we have in Cachuma that we've actually been storing up, planning to use. So that's important. So what's the discussion that's going to heat up is evaporation. So as you may recall from prior years, the evaporation formula for Cachuma kind of blows up when there's no allocated water left in the lake, except for what's carryover. And so we're going to be sitting down to, again, negotiate, hopefully come up with something reasonable, because we have a lot of water in that lake that's at stake. And again, Kelly has made some assumptions as to what those evaporation formula will be. But if it ends up being something very drastic, it could change what's available to us there. And then we have our recycled water here. And then, of course, desal, which is really making up a good chunk of our supply now at 30%.
And on this figure, does this show budgeted the 40% allocation or now the 20% that's been renegotiated?
This, I believe, Ms. Dyer was pretty conservative and used probably 20, because in May we didn't know. It wasn't until we did the math that we thought that 40% was reasonable. Yeah, and is assuming the use of carryover. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I just want to emphasize, I'm in agreement with you that it was not the county's proper position to write a letter that was counter to the member unit's interests and what our request was for that 40%. So I'm happy to hear that that will be coming back. So we can discuss our response to that. That does affect our overall water allotments and what we can use. And if you could maybe say more about the evaporation. I mean, if you're going from your 40% and you're not using it and you're just using 20%, and so we're just losing the rest to evaporation, or how that affects the actual water use.
Yeah, we can definitely bring back a little more discussion on that, but it's the evaporation, the way the county's kind of taking it. They have a vested interest in the park at the lake, and so they're interested in preserving the water in the lake for recreational fishing and stuff like that. So they are wanting to see more of the water left in the lake, and indeed, if you leave that water in the lake, in 3 years it's gone due to evaporation. And so we would prefer to have that allocated and see that it's used rather than just sit here and watch it evaporate. What's challenging is typically when the reservoir is not quite full, but certainly above 100,000 acre feet, there's enough evaporation on Cachuma to supply a whole nother city of Santa Barbara. So the evaporation that occurs at Cachuma is pretty significant. And so we're interested in certainly maximizing the use of water there. The smaller the surface area of that lake is, the lower the evap gets. And so there is some strategy to managing that lake and, fully utilizing it. And so we could sit here and just leave the water there and it will evaporate.
Thank you. And then just one more comment. I just want to echo that how grateful we are to the downstream interest for working with us cooperatively and sharing information so that we could delay that barge deployment and really conserve our water, but also plan fiscally for our future. So thank you.
I do want to prevent just a little update. Next time we come back, we are going to be revisiting the impacts of development. So we, in 2016, presented what the impacts were. We're going to be bringing back updated numbers on what the impacts have been to water supply, and also just, again, revisiting our regulations. We're not going to be looking for a decision, but just be looking to refresh everyone's memory of where we were with those and what options we have available. Certainly, if we don't see any rainfall, we're going to be talking about implementing or at least revisiting some of those options in the new year.
Good. Mayor Pro Tem Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I really agree with Mr. Hart's point in terms of what we're doing symbolically versus what we're doing practically. And as we try to rebound from the malaise of the storms and the mud flow and all that, and we're having the economic downturn, and we need to reestablish our aesthetic. And I think part of that would be Daily Plaza. And to that end, are we plumb for recycled water at? I'm getting a shake head. No.
No.
And is there any hope, or is there any practical application to like a purple truck system where we could water remotely, at least to establish and do our street tree programs and whatnot before we start losing all the assets that are just basically live in landscape?
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, so the Parks Department is using recycled water for the watering of trees, city trees. However, it probably would not be effective for a lawn like that, in particular, given the constraints of having to truck it around and then also when you would use it. It works for the street trees typically because they have those slow-release bags that they put it in, and they're able to get it all into the ground. But we can sit down and talk with Parks about alternative options, but I think that the costs would kind of kill that. A typical lawn, you can correct me, uses about 4 feet of water in a given year. So that's 4 feet of water over that entire area is a significant amount of trucking.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of establishing and then be able to intermittently use potable. But I mean, it's one of those things where Mr. Hart's correct. It is the front door to the town, and we need to reestablish that. We know it's symbolic. Mm-hmm. The amounts are still minuscule comparatively. So, thank you.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question. I remember there being a report by KUIT about cloud seeding. Is that something that is still being done, or was that just an experiment?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, yes, we participate with the county in a cloud seeding program. Again, this last year, because of the Thomas fire, we actually canceled that contract. We did not want to seed any storms and cause more damage. But typically, we are participating in the cloud seeding program run by the county. And again, there are very small windows in which that cloud seeding program works, and you pay to have the aircraft or ground-based seeding basically on standby for those particular events where you have the right moisture and temperatures to really make it effective.
Okay, and what impact, if any, has the recent legalization of marijuana had on the water supply?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, we don't really have a way of monitoring that. We aren't aware of any commercial growers in town, so I don't anticipate that it has had much of an impact.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Councilmember Friedman.
Well, first, I want to thank the residents who have continued to show that you've taken the drought very seriously, and for your conservation efforts. I think it's quite remarkable that we use the same amount of water now with double the population as we did back in the 1950s. So appreciate that. And then also our partner agencies for working with us to really achieve water management that has allowed us to get to this point and still have our water available. and then also our staff individually. I'll start with De La Guerra Plaza. I agree with all the points that have been made, Councilman Hart and Rouse, but I also think Councilmember Sneddon raises an excellent point too, is what's the future of that and the example we can set. So I am interested just to see what information you bring back to us. I think that's what this is, just information gathering. For us at this point, no decisions have been made, so I just want to clarify that point. And I was going to speak to this at the council committee assignment reports, but I think it's relevant to the discussion now. And it's last week, Central Coast Water Authority had our monthly meeting. And just like the Kachuma project water, there are a lot of moving parts to our state water and allocation, and also the delivery of state water that's coming to Kachuma. And among some of the things that are going on there are the reassignment of the contract. Right now, the county manages the contract for the state water agencies, and there is discussions on transferring that into to the Central Coast Water Authority. And at this point, the Department of Water Resources has stated in writing that they're open to that. So now there's going to be some discussions at the local level here of the implications of that, and having a Central Coast Water Authority and the member agencies controlling that contract with the state relating to our state water. There's also the issue, when you look at this chart, you'll see that state water is very important part of our water supply, and it's going to become more important, especially as the drought continues. And so there are discussions now also about extension of the state water contract, which only runs through 2035. So there is a proposal statewide to extend the contract, and for us locally it would be another 50 years. And so there's a lot of moving pieces in that. Has a lot of financial implications, but also our ability to continue to receive state water, and which has been a real lifeline during the last drought. And then also another issue that is taking place is the Department of Water Resources has changed the formula for how they contract out the costs they allocate to pay for the maintenance and of our stretch of the state water project. And through this new formula of how they're allocating it, there are significant increases in costs that are associated with it in the millions of dollars annually that are taking place. So Central Coast Water Authority staff are engaging with Ernst & Young to really analyze those numbers. And so we're just trying to have get a better understanding of what those numbers are, how they were calculated, why, and true those up, and then work with the Department of Water Resources to really understand those numbers. And then, and I think there was, and lastly, this will be helpful to the public, is that staff at the Central Coast Water Authority is working on an easily understandable fact sheet that will be available on the Central Coast Water Authority website that kind of breaks down state water, how it's allocated, our historical averages that we've been able to use, and how much water has been delivered, so that we can really understand how the cost of state water, but also how much we've been used, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on how much we've got, how much we pay for it. So just as we're moving through a lot of pieces, and we're having an item coming related to that on October 23rd, there is a lot that's going on. And as some of these get fleshed out, I will be asked. I've talked with the executive director of Central Coast Water Authority to come and give a presentation to our council. But we need to have some of these issues resolved first, because I think it's important once they're resolved to understand those. So we're trying to find a date, and it might not be till next year, but it is on the agenda to have an update for us here and the public to really understand Central Coast Water Authority and what it does. So just wanted to bring that. And my other question, because I know it will come up from the public, is related to Gibraltar. Or I guess my question, I didn't say other question, is desilting. Can you speak to, if it gets full, is there would we desilt it, or what do we do there? I know that we're going to get that question from the public, so I'd rather see if we can have some type of response now.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, yeah, that's a question that actually comes up quite often, and it has been looked at. The county's looked at it, we've looked at it, and it's well in excess of $100 million to remove. At the time, we looked at about 2,000 acre-feet of silt, and that didn't even tackle the environmental issues of where that silt would go, is really just the trucking costs and removal costs. So COMB is embarking on a study right now to talk about sediment management, or to study sediment management and to look at different options. Because one of the issues that's out there is once Gibraltar is full, in theory, that sediment then, Cachuma will now see the full effect of that sediment. I mean, Gibraltar has acted in many ways like a backstop for that sediment, but once it is full, all of that will be passed down, and Cachuma will start to see that. So there is a need to develop a longer range plan for sediment management, but unfortunately, mechanical removal is probably cost prohibitive. One of the things, though, I think that's helpful to know is we do the radial arm gates that we have there. Those gates are about 20 feet tall. The way that the sediment would build up in there, in theory, we would retain about a 20-foot storage capacity in there, which is probably around 2,000 acre-feet of storage. Because as those gates open up and we get a big flow, it pulls from the bottom, so it kind of naturally will flush and keep the sediment. So, long term, we still see that Gibraltar will have some level of storage. It's just going to continue to diminish until it kind of hits that status quo.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Thank you. So thank you, staff, and also the regional partners that were mentioned. And I also want to thank Councilmember Friedman and Councilmember Sneddon. I think people often don't realize that our council acts as our water district board. A lot of cities have a separate district board. And in particular, these two members have taken on more responsibilities, going to a lot more meetings than they've been appointed as liaisons. And particularly in a drought, that's a lot of responsibility and a lot of stress. Again, all you heard that they mentioned in negotiating with other cities and bodies, it's really time consuming. So thank you both for doing that work for us. Regarding De La Guerra Plaza, I noticed there's some architects and land use people in the room for the next issue. I think this would be a great place to have a competition and see which one of you can design the best idea. A lot of small pueblitos around the state like Santa Barbara have a Zocalo or a civic center that has permeables or otherwise have a hardscape for lots of events. So I think we all agree we need to have something done there. Maybe removing the parking that was added years ago to really open it up for residents to use, not residential. That's a slightly different purpose. But there's a lot of different ideas, so it'd be great to see some of our brilliant architects and landscape designers compete to figure out the key to re-energizing that space.
Very good. Thank you. So thanks so much. And I guess the bottom line is everyone to continue conserving water. Mr. Hagmark, is that what I'm hearing? Our residents, our businesses, and thank you very much for the report. We'll close that item. And does anyone need a break? I think we can keep going. Okay. The next item, Madam Clerk.
Item 14, appeal of the Single Family Design Board's project design approval and final approval with conditions at 9